3 days worth of meetings.
That's right. Okay, everyone. Thank you all for patiently waiting. You all know we are here to discuss our budget, and as we left our meeting the last time, you all had all the question and answers. So I've just talked to staff, and we won't start there this time. I think you all hopefully have had ample time to go through it. And if you want to point them to a specific question for more detail or clarity, please just let them know, hey, I'm going to question 5 on page 2 of your document, and then they can go there as well to clarify. So rather than us go through the entire document as we started last time. For time's sake, we will start with the board for discussion, and then staff will step in to clarify, answer questions.
And just a note, in assembly, there are the previous questions and additional questions that we received last week from the county.
Mark, we didn't talk about that, adding that. So do you,
Might want to go now.
We gotta do the house.
so how about we start there for the board? If you will go in assembly and go to the questions that were added. Are they at the end, Mark, so that we can run them?
That should be in today's
Okay. In the document.
assembly, yes, for today, attached.
Yes, they are. They're right at the end.
So where?
So if you open the document, you will see 32 was not there last time. Neither was 31.
Okay.
So if you scroll all the
I
way
got
to the
one of
bottom.
nine. How many pages have you got?
19.
19. So if you scroll all the way
I got
towards
three.
the end of the document, those are your newer
Okay.
questions.
Oh, okay.
What
Yeah.
page do you shoot?
Down to what number, 30?
1 through 19 are all the county questions. We had 8 pages with the previous set, so
Yeah.
these are all.
Oh, what?
This
It was
whole
8
document of
pages
19
the
pages?
last time we met.
It was
Yes.
8 pages remaining from the original set for
Oh,
our
okay.
board members.
Okay, I thought there was more than that.
Yeah, I was like,
What?
Seems like
And then
that.
this is the new set, the 19
Okay.
pages are the new set that we
These are
received
new.
last week.
Ms.
John, I
Fisher?
would appreciate some discussion on the counselors, because I think that's an important expansion. And if we might just go, maybe I think it's 53A and B, page 149, just to talk more fully about what the expansion in counselors and social workers.
So what's to two of this document?
Did everyone get that? So we're going to start in
What
your
would that look like at the school
in
level?
your budget
I
book.
guess?
She's asking from the original set of questions from the last
I think
meeting,
it's
question
from the
50,
document itself.
Number 53?
53, which is our,
It's on page 23 of the 28-page document.
Okay.
Or the business cases on page 149.
I don't have 28 either. I only have.
I have 19.
The prior questions are in last week's, we didn't drag it forward.
Right.
Okay. So what page is that, the budget document?
149.
It's on 49 in your budget book.
So you're asking about how we would implement that?
Yeah, or what will it look like? What do you think it will
Well-
look like at our school level?
What's the vision?
Well, it's what I met with the Division of Principals this morning, and they asked about this. I said, first of all, it's the first of what probably is a multi-year funding plan, because the balance sits on our deferred list. Additionally, I said, while it's called counselors, it may well be social workers and/or also. And it will be acuity-based, and it is not simply changing the formula for all schools. So we'll be looking at sort of schools with greatest need, most challenging communities, populations, poverty, whatever it might be, and then working backwards from there based on how much funding we end up to support this. Some schools might have a need for additional counselor, some might better utilize a social worker for more home visits or whatever it might be. Or in some cases, a school might qualify for both. So that's really about as far as we've gotten. We've not designed the allocation model for how we get it, but it's clear that it's not for all schools.
And is the goal to have like a social worker at every school eventually or some point? or-
Well, we're basing it on national recommended ratios in the neighborhood of about 1 to 250. So if it's a 3-year goal, then eventually we'd like to get to that. But it's a lot of people and it's expensive, so we're rolling it out and we're saying let's at least in the first year try and put it in our neediest schools, if you will, in terms of what they can best utilize or what our departments, Brenda, her staff, and others say makes better sense here, social worker rather than counselor or whatever. So, but we haven't really gone any farther than that in terms of the model or how we distribute.
Just very quickly, looking at the ratios, there are recommended ratios of 1 to 250 for counselors, and then there may be a recommended ratio for social workers. But it's unlikely that an elementary school of 1,000 would need 4 counselors and 4 social workers, right? So that's why we're looking at an acuity model that lets us know what's already in the school and then what our school needs that are unmet to determine what needs to be applied in order to better support that school. And as Dr. Merrill said, in some cases it could be an additional counselor or more, could be additional social worker, could be both, just depends.
And when we talk about need, what are the kinds of things we're looking at? I know you don't have an exact, but
One thing, we have a very complicated model that identified how we arrived at our ESM schools.
Right.
So obviously, that's something with many variables that could get us in the ballpark, but there could be other plans, and I'm Kathy with you.
Well, and that's, Brenda and her team, in Student Support Services, are working on what an acuity model would look like and what are the factors, the data that we have now that lets us know where our students are with varying needs that could be supported through additional counselors or social workers. But I don't know if you've already identified some of them.
Yeah, so some of the things from, we already do some of the acuity model for our social workers, and when we do, we look at the number of Makita-Vento students that might be served at that school, as well as referrals for mental health. We're also now with some ESSO requirements to support students receiving foster care services. We're going to implement that into the formula as well. As we start to think through what we might do with an acuity model for school counseling, we're looking at maybe disproportionalities or disparities that we see with AP enrollment or gifted enrollment, gifted identification, and how school counselors could support addressing those inequities that we see in systems. Also, our school counselors do a lot of work around bully prevention. So what does the data tell us from our student surveys around students' perceptions of safety at schools, and how we might look to use counselors to also impact those kind of traits.
Okay, I have Keith, just a
last question.
additional. Okay.
Sort of like what we did with the ESM schools, where we kind of took those factors and then came up with an index. Right. Basically, would there be a way to, I guess, the way I guess we can do it. And I'm thinking about like equity and the trauma-informed piece. Is there a way to kind of look at disparities in, say, AG identification, spectral identification, suspension, disproportionality, come up with some sort of equity index and have that figured into the acuity model as well, and then also kind of taking into account levels of trauma.
Right. I think those are all really good suggestions as a part of that.
Yeah.
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 Okay, Dr. Martin then. Okay.
So my question on this counselor issues, have we had conversation with the commissioners about potentially partnering on some, particularly the social worker aspects of it? Because our kids have families, and our social workers deal with the student issues, but oftentimes the student issues are not unrelated to mom and dad issues. So the county has to deal with the mom and dad, we have to do the school, the county has to do the 12 months of the year. We're only there for about 10 months of the year. A lot of our social workers end up on their own time working with the kids over the summer break. And so it strikes me that this is one of those areas where, is it our budget, is it their budget? We need to get the job done, and it strikes me this would be a place where we could do some interesting collaboration where if we would work together, we would actually able to give better services, more comprehensive services for a lower cost because we wouldn't be duplicating effort. Have we had any of that conversation?
We have lots of collaboration with Wake County Health and Human Services, but a school counselor is very different from a school social worker is very different than a regular
Right.
Social worker. But we do collaborate with them on many things. We have child family teams in our school where if there is a social worker from Wake County Health Services that's involved, they're involved in those conversations. Our work with foster care now is a direct connection with the social worker who is handling that placement, and our folks picking that up at the school door to be sure kids receive the resources they need to be successful in school.
So I appreciate that we're doing that, but I guess what I'm looking at since we're having a budget discussion, not just the counselor discussion, right? Here's your pot of money, here's your pot of money, and from some of the work I've done talking with social workers in schools, they feel an inefficiency of this disconnect. And I guess that's where I'm asking is, could we move beyond just the collaborative work to talk with our commissioners and say, hey, let's maybe jointly fund or something? Have we had any of that conversation? I guess the business aspect of it is really my
Not
question.
around this budget item, not yet. I think it's good. I would welcome sort of shared funding here on the need for social workers, school-based, youth and adult, family care, all those things. So, but no, there've been no discussions yet. I mean, I like the idea.
In that regard, former principal at a school in Fuquay worked with social services to determine that 43 of her 44 children of highest needs had cases at the county. And they developed a collaboration in southeastern Wake that actually spread to a dozen or more schools. And unfortunately, we've lost that institutional knowledge. Principal John Ringo ultimately became a central office leader of spreading that gospel and bringing together. And some of the anecdotal stories and actual success stories of mom never went to school. She refused to go to school. Why does mom refuse to go to school? Because her teeth are bad. So the combination of people working together found dental resources. When mom's teeth were fixed, she was willing to go to school to support her child and attend a parent-teacher conference. So I mean, there are real substantive barriers that are perceived by the people that we're trying to help. And so that's an anecdote from years ago with a program that started with Marge Ronco at Lincoln Heights.
Interesting. The institutional knowledge must not be gone, because I met with the school social worker earlier this year. I talked to staff about it, and literally she was bringing up something very similar, so she must have gotten.
Yeah, I mean, we've been able to have that relationship. I'm not exactly sure what happened with the money exchange, if there was any money exchange, but there was certainly a strong collaborative spirit around the idea of more wholly meeting the needs of the child and their support system.
Well, with privatization of mental health and mental health reforms, there's different silos now, different pots of money, so.
Yeah, a lot has changed in terms of the governmental structure for mental health support since then.
Dr. Merrill, when you're looking at the multifaceted of the counselors, as we add those, I thought about the needs in our schools, particularly our high-need schools. that we look for counselors that are trained in dealing with children of poverty and children of trauma, because that takes a certain skill set that I think would be beneficial. And also, I don't know if this is possible or not, but that we have some counselors that are roving counselors, not necessarily assigned to a school, but would be able to be deployed to schools that may be having a surge of kids that are of trauma and having really difficulties. Because many times we get overwhelmed. We have a lot with our behavior coaches, and they're not in a school. They're serving in multiple schools. Don't know, but I'd like some conversation, not today, but with student services about how we can best deploy the extra counselors to meet the needs of our kids.
Make a note of that. Any other follow-up questions regarding expansion of counselors, use of counselors, implementation? Okay. All right, well, move on to the next set of questions. Perfect.
Now I did.
What'd you say? Did you?
I just found it in sentence.
Oh, okay.
That's how delayed.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. Next set of questions?
I need to know a little bit, maybe, can you tell me a little bit more about the director in equity affairs, what that would, since it's a one position rather than more than one?
Right.
Certainly. So a lot of work.
And it's less than he asked for.
Yes, it was.
It is less, but every little bit helps. So I shared with the board earlier today when we were talking about the work in equity affairs that I support about 30 schools this past year. And this was the first year that we turned down more schools than we were able to kind of support. What the board also may not see is that there's a lot of work done on Title IX issues, Office of Civil Rights issues in terms of investigations that me, one person, it's very difficult to do, particularly when you don't have control over when these things might come up. Even beyond that, we talk about sustainability of the work, of the designing of curriculum and equity curriculum and programming, professional development, in collaboration with other departments within Wake County. So there's just a lot that we're not able to leverage because I am the only person. But when you think about working in the community, working with other departments, and working in schools, doing presentations and coaching, the extra assistance is much needed, particularly as we look to move in a more systemic nature with respect to training all principals, training all assistant principals, central service staff, and people who are new to the district over time. How do we sustain that work? We're going to need an infrastructure to support it. And so this is just the beginning of what that work is.
And yeah, I don't doubt at all that you need expansion because that would not surprise me. I also wondered if it was the fact that we needed a director type position or we needed two other type of positions or. So I was just wondering.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
By director and not administrator or even cooperating teacher. If you're talking about, because you're really good at what you do, can you not teach someone else and get more people out in the field? Do you see what I'm
I don't
going?
think it's a either or, but it's a both and. So we do need, that was part of the original request, cooperating teachers. To develop curriculum. But director level positions suggest that you can go into any school and speak to staff in a way that a principal or an assistant principal have been able to do. And so that's the type of position that we need to be able to kind of direct equity conversations. So it's not an either or, but it's a both and.
And I completely concur with that need largely because what you so eloquently didn't say is there are lots of Title IX guidance, and it is steep. And just so you know, we're currently working with another school district on this and the UNC system, and it's taken us over a year to get people up to speed.
And your policies, including, you know, anti-bullying, harassment,
That's right.
discrimination, incorporate a specific role for Rodney's office. And that to have to delve into specific detailed investigations while doing the broader work around equity is he's swallowed whole
Yes.
and needs help.
Easily.
And I'm not sure you referenced, if there is a school-based issue, that's immediate response that could wipe out his regular calendar for a week, for instance.
Yeah.
And so that, which is totally unpredictable.
That's right.
So,
And you only need one for that to happen.
And that was going to be my question, you know, you can schedule professional development, but then if something happens, do you find it hard to reschedule? Because, I mean, that's a big unknown.
We've had to do both. I mean, you can't necessarily reschedule when you have 3 or 4 schools coming together, that type of thing, and staff are waiting. So part of it is that you kind of have to figure it out, which it's not ideal. But.
And you're getting more for professional development. What are the highlights of what you're looking forward to doing with that? You know, whether it's, you know, you talk about the ESM schools and being contract focused or district wide. What are you looking forward to with that?
Right, so I kind of want to lean back on what I shared with the board a few weeks ago in terms of the broader look at the equity plan that we want to implement. So we need to create foundational experiences, equity learning experiences for principals and assistant principals, counselors, social workers, and at the time I termed E-teams. You'll remember that equity teams within schools, those who are kind of coming together to make sure that equity is on the table in each of our schools. So to provide foundational experiences for those people, educators, we want to bring in a program that's going to cost, you know, up front, while we build internal capacity to do that type of programming ourselves. That's why we needed the director level position, because it involves a lot of curriculum development, program development, that type of thing. But when you look at the professional development dollars that's in the proposal, it's primarily for establishing what that foundational experience will be for all educators in our district. And we have some ideas on what that can be.
So this is budget and you're talking money, and I'll go ahead and throw myself under the bus, but I mean, the reality is that the more work you do here, the less you're gonna have to pay us, because it's the less claims that you have.
That's what I'm thinking too.
Yeah, okay. Well, you know, then I went ahead and said.
I'm kidding, Jonathan, I'm totally kidding, but it's true.
So just as a reminder, the budget case includes a request for a director and a request for a student equity program coordinator. There are 2 positions.
Can we get an update on what we anticipate HB 13 as amended to allow us to do with our local budget request, or what it requires us to do?
So if you'll go to the end of the present of this group of questions,
The ones in your assembly for today.
The one, the very last mission.
it's page 19 of the ones that are in today's assembly.
ask me why it's the last question.
That's number 32. Because you needed a chart?
You need more
Because you didn't want us
time.
to get to it?
No, we start at the end.
We always read the last chapter.
That's all right. The ability.
Yeah, so in the chart, basically, it's telling you where we are today with current legislation, how we operate today is the first column. The current legislation, which was the class size reductions, in the second column, then the original House Bill 13s in the third column, and the revised House Bill 13s in the final column, with the salary and benefit cost of $1.8 million. And that's salary and benefit only for the employees. And of course, this is an estimate based on what we know now about students coming into Wake County next year, which includes projections of kindergarten students. But what we have registered now on the numbers that we have. So that's an estimate, but it's a pretty solid estimate on what we know.
Okay. So this is a fairly significant improvement over needing to find 13 million
Correct.
or 26 million.
Correct.
Yes, sir.
And as long as it holds up right now,
This
this is
year.
what we're looking for.
But this is for 1 year, not
Correct.
a permanent solution.
As I read it now and as I see it in year 2, the start of the 18-19 year, then the numbers in column 2 would be in effect, 18-16, 17-17.
Those go into effect the year.
For the year
our
18
budget for 18-19.
18-19, yeah.
So back to the syncopation.
But there's,
back to the same
and there's some
So
discussion about
there-
paying for special ed.
There is discussion, although I don't see it in the legislation, that it's the intent of the legislature to add a separate allocation for the specials positions or program enhancement or whatever you want to call them. So that should help mitigate what otherwise would be the expense for us. I mean, we're hearing strong commitment to address that. So that's all we're hearing at this
But we're
point.
not hearing strong enough to put in the budget this year.
Well, I mean,
They haven't,
I don't know
they
that.
haven't released their budget yet this year.
Yeah, so,
I mean, it could end up there. I mean, it could be modified in this, although this is moving through committee, so I'm not sure it'll change, but, so there, I don't know.
Well, the original HB 13, and I assume this one, had no fiscal note attached to it. So there was no negative financial impact on the state to adopt HB 13 and have to assume HB 13 as amended, which should allow it to move through the legislative process pretty quickly. And hopefully there will be an additional discussion by the budget people on what happens to program enhancement positions as we move forward.
When do we have to start worrying about the capital
Yeah,
aspect
thank you.
of this? Because, I mean, the capital aspect is bigger in terms of dollars than the operating, at least short term.
I think as soon as this is passed, we need to start working on a plan for capital.
Do you feel like the legislature knows that by not acting this year, it puts us in a difficult, if not untenable, position to plan for capital, right? Because we can't, same thing this year, right? By putting it off a year, we can't build those extra seats easily.
I don't know how they're thinking on that.
Well, and coupled with that, it's back to the 18, 16, 17, 17, having that difference in kindergarten and first grade, which I recognize was, had been before, but at the same time, with such a lower ratio, it's going to constrict so many of our schools that are capped now. We were moving away from capped, we're getting so many of our schools uncapped, we're moving in the right direction in that regard, and this makes it
I would think our facilities committee ought to take up the issue of how do we plan for students once this is passed? And how do we plan for that? I mean, it is likely to be some combination of creative use of space and perhaps other things. The idea of moving a trailer into place within 12 months is not something that's going to happen in the places where we have the highest concentrations of kids. The municipalities won't permit it. So we'll have to be creative. Once this is finalized, then we can look at where, based on the research staff did earlier about where we would have space available and where we might not, then we can look at it more precisely once this gets passed.
Well, so I guess my big question on that is, I just want to make sure that as the legislators are trying to do whatever they're going to do to this, they recognize the capital implications, because we don't want to get to next year and then, oh, we didn't know. Because this decision has real capital.
Clearly, not just about the loss of the special instructional opportunities, but the need for capital. I think that's been clearly presented to legislators.
No, I think that needs to be re-emphasized though.
I won't disagree with that.
Yeah.
It's not a message we need to lose, but I'm sure they're aware today.
Right.
And we're talking business case. This is not handout. This is how do you run a business.
Right, exactly.
Well, I also want, we have to refocus on class size. I mean, the state gave us funding to reduce class size, but they didn't fund all of that. They didn't fund the mandate that we're facing. But it also pushed on class sizes grades 4 through 12. And we've gotten bigger class sizes in the high schools and the middle schools. And I think as a board, we need to think through how can we advocate for the same attention of class size to be K-12.
That feels like a necessary, thoughtful strategy because it could land us right back here in 412 next year. Meaning, great, because that was largely the beginning conversation for the law that's currently enacted of, oh, well, we've heard you say you need these lower class size ratios. So in terms of strategy, we have to be really.
But lowering class size is one of the most expensive strategies you can.
Oh, I agree, and the answer has been, get what you want, but we're not gonna pay for it.
Right.
So we'd have to be very clear in our strategy, for fear of getting what we want without dollars, again.
Well, we have to just be candid too with the numbers. You can't say that I've reduced class size like all the documents show, and you reduce the total number of teachers. So I think we just have to be much more candid. These are the months of employment that have been allocated. I might say I've reduced class size, but if I did an overall cut, I didn't reduce class size, I just shifted. And shifting resources and appropriating resources are two completely different things. We just got to be candid about where what is happening.
Any other follow-up questions, conversation? I know it's playing all of our minds now, so.
I would just add that, that there's a component about reporting requirements and compliance. And if we all have an opportunity across North Carolina to agree on the shape of the report, then I think we ought to be able to compare apples to apples across 115 districts. So I'm optimistic that we will be invited to help shape that report. Now, the variables that we're to cover probably won't change. But as you've seen, it's pretty sophisticated in Wake, the way we move state and local positions on an almost daily basis. So if we can build that in advance, and then probably also write our own program against our data to pull this.
Yes.
Because I'm not 100% confident on statewide software that pulls fully accurate data. And so with the teeth that the bill includes, I want to be certain of what we submit.
We appreciate that.
It is. I'm just saying.
Yeah, there's something in that.
Well, especially since what you're talking about largely around the data piece.
Yeah, and I think the state superintendent said something about wanting to update state software around this, which would be nice also.
And hopefully with some feedback, so it's
Yep.
apples to apples.
And the reporting is to the 115 LEAs. Does it apply also to restart schools and charter schools and schools that
It
receive
does not apply to
vouchers?
charters, and I do not believe currently it would apply to our restarts either, because they are charter-like.
Right.
So,
Or to schools that receive vouchers, they wouldn't have this?
I don't know, I doubt it, but.
Not that we've heard. Did you have your hand up, Mr. French?
Well, I was just gonna, our current data systems, our school-based data managers connect children to teachers. And that's done there, but I don't know of anything that connects the teachers in the building to what they're paid at the state level. That's a separate, different system. And so if some of the calculations that are needed are how much money do we spend in this school for these teachers, and that creates another whole issue for cobbling together the tables from different programs to come up with that magic. But I think that the opportunity for the superintendents to influence what the data collection looks like is healthy, and hopefully the practical application of what's available would influence the structure of that report.
Anything else on Mr. Sutton?
Question, but it's,
Yeah.
if we're done with this topic, I wanted to go back to the equity conversation and budget. This is my question of thought, and I would preface it by saying that I'll admit it is probably a little bit in the weeds. But in thinking about, and I'll go back to when we created Dr. Trice's position, it was put at the assistant superintendent level so that it had the ability to sort of reach into the different departments within the central office. And so in thinking about that, and the discussion that we were just having, my thought is there a way in terms of looking at the expansion of the department, and as we talked about the various needs, we talked about professional development, a curriculum specialist with having someone that has the ability to sort of write curriculum. There are other parts where equity sort of factors into our work in the facilities department, particularly when we have a bond and looking at the meeting our policy around spending in facilities. Same in purchasing. Mr. Bloomberg mentioned the legal piece, and even in student services. So there are a number of departments that the equity work sort of cuts across. Is there a way to, in terms of how we might then begin to strategically align some of that work, where there are lapsed salaries from those departments or savings from those departments? Could some of that be sort of repurposed, if you will, into the equity piece that might then support, for example, again, a curriculum specialist that's able to look at the curriculum needs at the schools through an equity lens, or some of the positions that we already, and I know that might mean we're not taking from one department, put it in another, but again, some of the work that's done and maybe aligning that in such a way that both builds some support in those departments with the equity work, and you've got the experience and skill set of, again, curriculum folk, purchasing folks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it is possible, but not through the use of lapsed salary, because that we use that to balance the budget. But going into their own budgets and working with those departments and saying, we're going to charge you a little money here for some service. I mean, something like that, which is what you're also describing, I think. So they've got some skin in the game, if you will. That's entirely possible. I think Rodney probably has some plans about how to get deeper into some of those departments. They're already coming out some and helping him in some of the teamwork that he does, but I follow what you're describing.
And I'll say, Dr. Merrill, so when I was speaking about curriculum, I'm not necessarily talking about the curriculum that the students are engaged with. We need an equity curriculum that leaders and teachers deal with that is yet to be created. And so, but it's not an either or. So I work very well with the academics department, purchasing new material, making sure that material was culturally relevant. I've been at the table very much so with that, working with Brynn in her office, the human resources office. So the issue isn't necessarily reaching across departments, but the curriculum I was speaking about is the curriculum that we as leaders and teachers will be learning around equity. So I just wanted to clarify that.
But to the point about sort of charging them a little bit, if you will, but that does then, every department sort of has some skin in the game, if you will, how that gets managed. I mean, I'm not sure if that person sits then in those departments or if it's in equity. I mean, that's up to you all, but it does sort of have everyone sort of invested in the equity piece, and it makes that work that much more, I guess, comprehensive, and everybody again sort of has some skin.
I think you'd be pleased too with the receptivity that we got from all departments and all central staff over the past couple of weeks as a result of what we brought to you and said, we're going to accelerate this work. We're going to have the smaller meetings. So I think there's probably more buy-in than folks might think from our departments, which is encouraging. But I hear what you're saying.
And that was sort of why, I guess the genesis of my question, or that framework, was thinking about how to accelerate, knowing that, resources are limited, and we can only do so much, that, here's a way to maybe accelerate some of that, and even in a 2 or 3 year plan, looking at how to sort of build out the equity department without necessarily having to add more dollars, but maybe just transferring, if it's some months of employment or something like that, as a way to build it out a little bit faster.
Skin in the game eventually builds more sustainability too, in terms of what's across the board. Did you have, sorry.
I was going to ask a follow-up to this, if that's okay.
Yes.
To ask Dr. Trice, the curriculum you're talking about, is it going to be something that you're looking to purchase from existing curriculum, or is something Wake County is going to develop based on your experience?
There's really nothing out there to purchase. It will have to be developed. Some of that I've been doing since I've been here.
Right.
So if you look at some of the work that I've been doing in schools, it's bleeding over into the academics department, into their professional development. So what we want to develop is a curriculum. So if I enter as a Wake County Public Schools principal, in 2 years and 3 years, what do we want our principals and assistant principals to know and be able to do? So just like we have that for the academics, we need that same thing around equity learning. So that's kind of what we'll be building out. And then the type of equity training that we want all of our educators to have access to is something that has to be sustained over time. If you think about the number of principals that turn over, assistant principals, we want that mindset to be a constant part of how we onboard our employees. But that takes infrastructure. So initially, we're going to have to lean on perhaps outside contractors to help with that. But very quickly, in the plan that I presented to the board, it was very focused on building our internal capacity to do that work as opposed to leaning on outside agencies to do that. And that's what I'm interested in.
That sounds good. Thank you.
And a follow-up to that, Dr. Trice. So you use the word sustainability, but I want to ask, when you say that, then you talked about the fact that we have turnover and there are new employees coming on. I'm also curious about how or have you thought about, does this curriculum have components to actually sustain the culture that we are trying to create? So I think you understand, I generally, dosage is important to changing culture, so I was curious, when you say sustainability, do you also mean that?
Sustaining the work. Yeah, so that's what it's about, is sustaining the work. And if you kind of reflect back to the presentation that I did for the board a few weeks ago, that's at the heart of what we want the infrastructure to do, is sustain the work over time. But the way you sustain that is that as you onboard new people, you have a core that you want them to learn about how we do business in Wake County. And so that's what my model is about.
I just want to make sure you have a process to remind people that forget, that don't leave.
So, tangentially related, on page 150, we talk about the expansion of SCORE. And at the end of the first paragraph, it says the program model will include additional needed wraparound supports to ensure student success. I'm excited to hear more about what that's going to entail. If anyone is able to speak to that, because I see that we have counselors and social workers, and what is that going to look like for our students that get enrolled in SCORE?
The additional wraparound supports.
Yeah. What do we have now, and what are we looking to? What are we hoping to do with this? Because I think that this is kind of a highlight of something that we've been talking about. I'd like.
Sure. So currently in our SCORE model, we have transition counselors that help us support students, and not just not in just when we transition them back into the schools, but how do we support them once they are in SCORE? So are there community resources that we need to connect students to, whether it is mental health resources or is it an issue that a family doesn't have adequate food at home? What are those underlying issues? So currently, we have the 5 transition counselors that help to support students. In the business case that we have there for the SCORE Academy, we would expand those resources. I think we were asking also for a social worker. And then we are going to look at taking our graduation coaches from communities and schools and using those as our community connection partners for the SCORE Academy. And so they have, communities and schools obviously has a very long arm into the community and have other resources and supports that they're going to be able to bring to bear for us as we start to support those vulnerable students.
So a distinct budget issue that I'd like to bring up is the question 49 on our previous document about the iReady middle school assessments. I read the answer to that, but when I get out into schools, I hear over and over again teachers are feeling like more time is being taken up by assessment so that there can be less time for instruction. This assessment, the business case justification for it is based on EVAS scores and NCDPI report card. All of that information tracks just directly with the socioeconomic status of the schools. We have so much assessment, I don't see that these things are going to give us a whole lot new. In fact, I was talking with a teacher this morning who says basically any teacher that's worth their salt can evaluate where where a kid's at. An initial assessment is often useful to try to target things, but good teaching helps you recognize where your students need to go. And it reminds me an awful lot of campaign polls. I've rarely read a poll that didn't tell me what I already knew. And I think there's an awful lot of that goes on with our assessment. And I think that $500,000 for iReady would be better spent on professional development to work with our teachers to, okay, so there are these challenges. How do we meet these challenges? I do not see that this test is going to do anything that's going to improve the learning for our kids.
So I'll just address that. The iReady tool has a history of a couple of years back. We had a number of schools that were piloting it a few years ago, and this year that we're in right now, 16-17, it is in all middle schools at a discounted rate from the vendor. It's not really an assessment, it's a progress monitoring tool so that we can do some diagnostic work with students to determine what their gaps are. And what this tool does that is helpful for middle school principals and why they've asked for it is because it provides specific information about where the gaps are and some prescriptive remedies and resources that can be applied to where those gaps are. So it does, I think it supports the teachers, what they see, as providing both data around how the students are doing with specific information that lets them know where the gaps are, as well as resources and tools to support addressing those gaps. That's what the tool is designed to do. And it is one where has been vetted through not only our principals, but the strategic plan team as well, and within balanced assessment. So it's not really considered an assessment, but it is a part of the package of what is considered balanced assessment that includes some diagnostic tools as well as some assessment tools and some ways to do assessment differently. But our middle schools have been screaming for a diagnostic that provides resources and does some other work. We piloted it for a year. We've put it out to all schools this year at a reduced rate, and they are asking for it to continue. We just can no longer get the reduced rate.
And I hear that. I don't agree with it. And I still would contend that $500,000 would be better spent on professional development. But I am one board member, and I see a budget where we're looking for, we're worried about covering the $1.8 million for still making up the HB 13 catch. and here's about $500,000, where I frankly believe that getting a kid PE in the arts and languages is probably going to do more than this tool will do. That's my feeling. I would love to see this money be used otherwise.
Dr. Martin, I'm going to disagree with you on this one
That's
because, pardon me?
That's perfectly fine.
I'm a seventh grade, let's say I'm a seventh grade teacher. And in my classroom, I have, you said I can tell as the teacher what they need. Well, if they're somewhere near grade level, I can probably do a quick assessment on my own, figure it out. But a great many of them may be reading on a third grade level. That takes a whole different set of skill level. It's not just a general PD. It's intensive reading instruction. And it's one of the concerns I had is how we get real good reading instruction in our middle school for our kids that are still not at grade level. They may leave fifth grade and they've made progress all the way through, or they're English language learners. So this gives, and you're not going to find your middle school teachers necessarily, some do, have those skills in teaching basic reading. And you can, the tool will help diagnose that for you, but it also, isn't it accessible to kids at home?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not just something that happens. There's like, okay, if this is really where the root cause is, you can't get to the next level until you're able to master this skill set. Not only can you practice it at school, you can access it at home. And when we put Wi-Fi on our buses, then they can access it on the way to and from school. They can be, practicing. So I see it as a real tool. It's a small expense for really helping our middle school teachers help those kids. This is not a tool for every single kid. You do not assign every kid in your class to iReady. It's only for those who have really high needs in terms of not being able to access the grade level curriculum.
I think the only thing I'll add to that is in many conversations a lot of us have about parents not having access to resources to help their kids at home, having had somebody who had their child need this, they felt it was the closest thing to having a textbook because they knew exactly what the kid's focus was. So they were actually able to look at it and see at home what the kid was supposed to be focused on. So for me, I guess I thought of this more as an intervention tool.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's how and again, my understanding is through another parent, but.
So we have a culture at the elementary school and some requirements around progress monitoring and when and how often it happens, even for students that are on grade level. And so that progress monitoring needs to continue into the middle school. And we've just not had the tools that were consistent across the district so that all schools had access to it. And so this is why this is in here. They requested it. We had another tool a couple of years ago that was hit or miss, did not provide the prescriptive and the resources to address the gaps and didn't identify the gaps. And I think it cost more or about the same as this, and we stopped doing it. Piloted the iReady, did the iReady across all middle schools this year. Like I said, we just can't get the rate anymore. So.
Any other follow-up? Okay.
Different question that I would find helpful in our discussion about the budget. So the charts on page 27, where they talked about growth and inflation, those were very useful for discussion. The question that I often have when I've talked with several of the commissioners is numbers like this sort of give us 2 points, that we were here, we're now here. And there's our inflation numbers, but we had a decline to flat when inflation kept climbing. And so we've got a big hole that was never filled in. And so here we're simply looking at where we are. Right? Inflation took us here, we're here, and so we're counting that as the differential. When in fact we've got a big hole that just because we would even make up to that inflation adjusted line doesn't mean we didn't have all these expenses that needed to be paid for. Some of the occurring stuff, if you just never did it, you're never going to be able to make up. And so it's not a complete fill in the hole, but there's a lot of, it's part of these deferred needs kind of issue, but if we could have somewhat of a assessment of really sometimes when I talk with commissioners, I say, look, we dug a hole 10 feet deep, we filled it up 8 feet, and filling it up that 8 feet was great, but that's not exactly new money to do new programs. We're not out of the hole yet. So how do we better communicate the hole that we've got to dig out of? This gets at some of it, but this is ongoing cost and it doesn't address the whole. So I'd love it if we could get a better visual talking point of that hole that we've got to dig out of yet.
Yeah, the interesting piece with this, and it's mentioned in the description, is we've had large increases in salaries in the past couple of years to teacher salaries for the state. And our local dollars have increased in the past 2 years. So you're correct that there was a time period from 2009 to probably 2014 or 15 where there was not much gain in anything. It didn't match inflation or growth. So I don't know where you grab what you didn't do. I'm not sure. You know, we had large, for instance, locally, we had large central office cuts around the 2009 time when we went through, and Mr. Bloomberg was with us when we went through the RIF policies, and we lost a lot of central office positions, and we cut back on a lot of central office services.
So I guess that's a little bit of an idea to think about, right? What services did we lose? By comparison, our janitorial services we've cut as well.
Right.
That hole is not a hole that we are ever going to refill, right? We're not going to go back and re-clean our schools the 3 days a week that we don't clean them. So those are things that didn't get done and never will get done. But a central office's position, for example, for professional development, you know, okay, that wasn't done, but that means we have more professional development that didn't get done. Some of that you're never going to be able to make up. But some of that really is a deficit that does need to be made up. Again, I recognize it's not an easy thing to do. I'm just suggesting that this would be a really important talking point, particularly in my discussion with the commissioners, because I think there's still a disconnect as to, you know, hey, we've given you all this money. Why are you still saying you don't have enough? Well, because we're still not out of the hole. And it's not a complete even fill. But I think we need to do a better job of having something we can help people understand what this deficit actually is.
So under the AI, this is different area. Appreciate that discussion. The AIG funding that we do, we have, is it mainly just for assessments is where we put money into the AIG on page 96?
That's correct.
Do we do any other funding towards meeting the needs of the academically gifted?
It's a formula-based allotment. So we receive the allotment based on the number of AIG identified students. So that means fluctuate in a given year up or down.
That's a federal or
State.
State, and they do meet the allotment of every child that has that assessment, or are they short?
No.
Of course.
We have a cap.
We have a cap.
4%. And about
And what-
16 to 18% are AIG identified.
So it's still about the same.
Wow.
It's always been only, no, actually it's worse.
So
Okay.
could we calculate that differential and put it on the deferred needs list? I just think that would be an important number to,
I know it used to be like a
Visualize?
13 to a
You could do the
4.
same, there's every line item in the budget you could do that for.
Well,
Special program services.
and I think that's another one that would be worthwhile
You know,
doing.
I mean, it's,
The reason I'm saying it would be important to communicate, Bill, is because, you know, as Commissioner
I'm not
Court,
disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that's a loan, I mean, that, as a loan item, I'm not sure we actually expressed the issue. We've got mandates from different levels of government that are not completely funded. And the local taxpayers are being asked to make up for it, and our amazing staff stretches a dollar until it screams.
yeah, we know that.
Yeah.
That's
So-
what I'm saying.
so-
I just
so
feel
let's
like
take-
So we're
no.
talking about the dollar, you're talking about the stretched dollar. how do we communicate the fact that that can't last forever, and that that somehow the resource has to increase in order to do the things that we've been doing for years
Yeah.
with
But it's getting worse.
substandard resources. Substandard is not the right word, but
It's just a good talking point, because when we have more and more kids coming here with academic needs, but also the challenges, we need to be able to tell the public. We've always used to use that terminology of what percent of funding we have, and what percent of children are actually in Wake County that have those needs. So I do want to, it would be nice to know those.
And we do stretch the dollar.
Yeah.
We stretch it a long way. But in special education, we stretch it and stretch it so the teacher may have more on their caseload in order to do it. But the kid with that need gets a special education teacher if it's written in their IEP every single day.
right.
They're lucky in AIG if they get it once a week. Twice a week is like a blessing, and in the area in which they're identified. And then we have this whole section of K3, K2, depending on how you want to define it, that are not getting those direct services that are identified because they're not identified. And I'm not saying we need to identify them, I just think the opportunity needs to be increased.
Not formally identified.
Yes, they identify themselves.
You see them in the classroom.
You see them, goodness.
We do see them, and we don't want them, these are the ones that might be going to charter schools, you know, that I see actually.
Oh, I think we're
Yes.
losing both ends.
Ends, ends, both ends, but yeah, I think you're right, we're definitely losing both ends.
And
but-
the middle.
Well, I can only handle two areas.
I'm with you. I really think it's
Two ends. In the middle is caught too. You're right, you're
So
absolutely.
when we get to exemplary status of our school system, then we're going to have something that everybody wants. It's moving towards there. We've got to keep that in mind, that that's where our goal has got to be. And once we're exemplary, then we've met all the needs and we funded it appropriately. And that we still have those arts because that's where that kid is
Right.
gifted.
That's the goal.
That's exactly right.
Yes, that's, and I
Meet 'em.
don't want to lose sight of
I
that.
don't.
Agree. Ms. Mahaffey?
I just had a question with our literacy coaches on page 100. That is all local and federal funding that we get for those positions?
Yes,
Okay.
but on that particular case, your base positions are all federally funded. So this business case is showing that we are requesting to move some of the positions off of the grant to local funding.
And the fact that they're in K2 where those kids really get, you know, instead of being reactive, you're proactive in getting them to enjoy reading, to work on reading. It is so important to start there.
But it's not just working with the children.
Right.
It's working with the teachers
Right.
because they need also coaching on how to best implement solid foundational reading skills.
Which was also seen in, I'm in the wrong part, in an expansion, I believe, a newer expanding program for K2, page 139, best practices in elementary literacy instruction, in order to ensure that core teaching is done in K5 and also, you know, K2. And Letterland, which you can't hear enough about Letterland in my house. I mean,
Right.
These
That's
are
a winner.
celebrities. So,
That's a winner.
and if kids are that excited about letters and Letterland, it's got to be working. I hear there's parades.
There are.
ZZ Zebra.
That was actually.
And in May, there's a special meeting of all the characters at Pullen Park, and it's loads of fun.
That was one of Ms. Carson's
Just volunteer. They're happy to have you.
Ms. Cash.
The same, just the other question, I think the answer is, on like page 179 for the Medicaid program administration, that's all funded dollars. We don't put any local dollars into administrating the Medicaid program.
This is reimbursement.
Okay, revenue side.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead. I mean, it's been reimbursement available for 8, 10 years maybe, which may drop this coming year because it's federal. And we're expecting, that's a risk area for us, I think, in a lot of federal funding. So, I mean, it may not, but.
Yeah, I was wondering.
So, yeah.
Okay.
But because of the other services we provide, that qualifies for a calculation that gives us a
Oh,
reimbursement.
that's not this? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There's no follow-up there. We can move on to Mr. Asian.
I got one question. With, everything we're talking about is dealing with K-12, which is core mission. And I had a question about, it's on page 28 of the original response. And it was, what are the revenues at all costs for the adult evening education program? I'm curious about this on just the idea, isn't that more of a Wake Tech function more than for Wake County Public Schools? And it says here that operating budget and expenses are $508,000. With everything else we're talking about being needed, does this really fall into the core mission we should be looking at?
That adult evening program is part of our community services, which is fee-driven. So it is outside revenues that are coming in the program. It's not coming from our local resources that are supporting the rest of the budget.
So there's no expenditures that come out of
The community services is a self-supporting enterprise fund.
completely? Even all the staff and
Yes.
all the...
And we charge the indirect cost rate at the maximum amount so that we are earning reimbursement for overheads such as utility costs and maintenance and those type of things.
They charge so much from the school.
So they are self-supporting.
A lot. We get that feedback, so.
We get
Yeah,
that
get a
feedback
lot of
We get that
feedback.
feedback a lot.
One of the reasons that that's been set up in the past is one of the few places where the community interacts with the school system if you don't have kids. And because it's self-supporting, as Terry's pointing out, it's considered essentially a win-win in that regard. It gives the community an opportunity to be involved in the schools in a way they might otherwise not, without costing the schools in the process, at least not the local money. Is the bulk of the conversation there.
And so it is 100% self-supported.
Any follow-up to Mr. Asian's question? All right. Okay. Next one.
This is one program.
I can't believe you don't get the cost. What do you mean?
What?
Budget cost.
Yeah,
I can't
usually-
believe you don't get the cost. of
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a great outreach.
I'm not either.
We maybe should.
It seems like a very interesting relationship with the
Happy,
community from the
fuzzy,
calls
yeah.
I get.
Yes.
Well, for startup churches, it's a good
Yes.
Oh, the churches love it, yes.
opportunity.
And I will say those, I mean, most of the things I get a call from, back to Tim's point, are actually entities who do work with children, not something like a startup church that it really is to use in our building. But- Okay. Let's try that. Next. Yep, we can change to another question. Shall I take silence that you all understand and do it? Okay.
And we're gonna get those bus drivers, right?
Hopefully. Good answer, Mark.
Yeah,
Dr. Maryland's out the window.
Mark is out there recording.
She's behind him. Mr. Commissioner, that is a visual
It
representation.
is, that is.
Yes.
I mean,
All right.
that's one to make note of.
That's what.
Yes.
He has an answer. You're coming up with something else.
No, you know, there is that one small piece that we do have in the budget, market responsive compensation, whatever.
Right.
To try and address that. And we're hopeful that combined with cameras on buses ought to be able to shift sort of the work environment for drivers. So you can't guarantee it, but if you don't try it, you won't know. And so that's where we're going. So that's where we're going next.
Then you did approve that $600,000 bonus to try to
Retention
retain over the
incentive.
summer also, which is a big piece for us to try to retain them at that time.
So I don't think we can put it into the budget right now, but I think we need to be careful with, in the whole local budget conversations. I think we're going to likely hear the living wage conversation from our commissioners again. And the number I recall was that we have like 4,300 or so employees that make less than the $15 an hour.
I cannot remember it, I was asked that by a
But it's in the ballpark, but like I say, there's one part of me that would like to put that in our deferred needs list to say this is what it would cost so that all of our employees
That
would
is a
get
question that the Commissioner asked,
living
I
wage.
did not have it off the top of my head.
We could put it into the deferred needs list, but at a minimum, I think I want us to be prepared when the commissioners talk about the living wage, because I've heard a lot of, we want to do this for all county employees. Our employees are county employees too.
I did get that question from the Commissioner, and I didn't remember the number.
Okay.
So you're saying it was 4,300 who, of our staff members make $15 an hour or less?
That's my recollection.
We'll send that to you just in an email.
Okay.
Because it was in presentation, we just can't find it that fast.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
It's in line with what they want.
The city of Raleigh's talking about doing that, the county's talking about doing that. There's no reason that our employees shouldn't
Right.
be on that same
Should be the same conversation.
conversation.
And just, talking about that, I heard on a drive somewhere on UNC, they were talking about how much housing affordability is a challenge for teachers in Raleigh and Charlotte, and I just pulled it up because my numerical memory is not as great as Dr. Martin's, but depending on experience, a Raleigh teacher could spend between 16 and 24% of his or her salary on monthly rent.
Yeah.
I would think it's higher than
I
that.
would
Could. Could.
I think, I was telling
That's
Anna
fair.
Connolly, I think Habitat had the number, but now I can't recall it.
It was 900 and something, and that was a couple of years old, was the
Yeah.
number Habitat is.
So if it's $1,000 a month.
When we were there, it was on their little.
12,000, it's,
Yeah, that gets up there and quick. And that's rent.
And they can't have kids.
Utilities and car payments and
right.
all those classroom expenses.
Yes.
I think, I sense we're winding down.
Yes.
And I want to thank Dr. Merrill and his staff for including us earlier in the process this year. I think we're seeing the results of it in the superintendent's budget and what will be our budget soon, particularly in the area of dealing with the unmet needs of kids that we were asking to leave us because we didn't know what to do with them. The social, emotional counselor, social work. I think we're seeing a shift toward wanting to figure out what are the tools necessary and how do we make them available to help young people make better decisions when they choose to be disruptive or whatever else they may choose. And I think that's extremely positive. And I think of this board, I'm not saying the superintendent didn't want to go there, but I think we made it clear in our work session early on that that was something of great concern to the board and alternative educational strategies and whatnot. So I really appreciate the opportunity for us to have that input.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think I said a few board meetings ago that hopefully the budget would speak, and I would speak for myself, speak to our heart priorities, and it does, to Mr. Fletcher's point. I mean, across the board, all all the things that we've talked about, we were able to chart out, our finance committee held true to making sure that we were engaged early. Ms. Kushner and I met with the county commissioners early. I just think overall the process, I hope people feel is beneficial, including our county commissioners. You had access to every step of the way, what we were thinking about, what we were talking about. And really, and Dr. Merrill and Ms. Kushner, you can speak to this, we were able to have those hard conversations early about what they could expect from us because the board talked about it early. I mean, although we were limited with our green dots, not going to forget that. It's not a little trauma from limited with our green dots. I did.
I know, yeah, limited green dots, definitely.
Green dots, for what were priorities, but I do think it was a great process, and I appreciate the leadership around that.
I'm excited when I think about the potential over the next several months for the board to define what an extraordinary school system
Me too.
would be comprised of.
That's all right.
And I could see us easily going, starting with our deferred list. And then the things we've even talked about here, some of the strategies here, if you fully funded AIG, if you fully funded special ed with no cap, if every student was conversant in 2 languages, that would be a really enjoyable activity, I would think.
That's our next finance committee activity. I think we might need a little.
Well, it may be bigger. I mean, it could be retreat-ish or whatever.
That's true.
But anyway,
That's true.
I think that would be, that could lay some foundation for the next several budgets, I would think. So anyway,
I mean, maybe we switch it towards that transportation conversation so we feel better about it. Just saying, that's like a sore thumb hanging out here for me.
Yeah, we get it.
You're not.
But I agree, Dr. Merrill. Thank you and your staff for the leadership.
No, that would be.
But I know it wasn't easy for you all to hang in there as we were all over.
Well, that's fine,
boy, that's an endorsement.
I didn't have a choice.
Well, we have in the book, this has been going on since September.
So
And you meant it.
And you meant it.
And Mark resoundingly said, that's fine.
I mean, you really couldn't have said anything better than that, actually.
It's been fun.
I think we just put that on a post-it.
So, next steps, and I almost hate to ask this.
No, you're right. That was
So my understanding, based on the discussion here today, that there's no changes other than what happens with the HB 13. We'll pay attention to that, and if that makes a change within this week, we will make that change in the budget prior to Tuesday, because we will bring it to you Tuesday to pass the budget, as we have to get this to the county. There's no other changes, is my understanding, correct?
I guess my question is, do we want any of those additional things added to the deferred list?
I do.
I would tend to like the AIG numbers, maybe the spec ed cap numbers, and the number of employees below $15 an hour.
And I have that down.
I think SPED will actually be pretty close, because as we've done a better job with core instruction and identification, we are right at what we're funded.
Well, we're close, but based on the numbers in here, I did that calculation for us, I don't know which number it was. We were off by like 0.5%, and that 0.5% was something like $3 million.
So we're 12.5 and we're funded at 12 versus being at 11.5 and funded at 12.
They can figure that out.
12.5, it stated that we have 13, maybe we're 13.1, based on some of the numbers, we're funded at 12.5.
Okay.
And that turns out to $3.2 million,
Okay.
which is not trivial.
Right.
So we can do that with a budget book that we create for you. What you will most likely see next week is a change in the budget act that we just talked about. You'll see that piece of it, and then we create the book to send to the county commissioners.
And
you'll have the correct.
It's important, because I don't think we've said this. Our ask was 56.6. If this adjustment to HB 13 holds up, our ask goes down to 45.4. And that's a significant drop from where we started. But we didn't do the math in the last 2 hours, and I just thought it was important to say that.
Yeah.
But,
I think it's important for us to remember we're going down.
Yes, yeah. It's important to know we're going down.
Any other final?
And we could still
remarks?
use the full 56.
Definitely could.
Oh, we can tell them it's a step towards more towards the word school, but.
Well, but also our next steps being that we are going to flesh out what
Right.
exemplary schools
That's
right.
and we'll need to plan for what the reduced class size going forward
Right.
are. I mean,
Right.
we need to do some planning starting fairly soon.
I actually think that's a great, I mean, the whole thing for me is really, again, it's a strategic planning model for our budget.
Right.
For our own operational side of the
Right.
budget.
And for me, this is my first time going at the budget and being involved from dots to dollars. That was cute.
All right.
For a while. And I really think the fact that starting that work, it was intentional for everyone, whether it was people on the board or staff, to look at that strategic plan that was created before my time here, but, and using that as a guidance was really, I think, key, and you see that throughout the budget, and so to all you guys that came before me and worked on that, I thank you, because it really sets the tone.
Anyone else?
Of course, we're going to run your exemplary system through our strategic plan filter also.
Oh, I think that's, they should be allowed. That's implementation, man.
Next version of the
implied, wasn't
strategic
it?
plan.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
That's implementation.
Strategic plan refresh.
Anyone else?
2020's coming fast.
I know. Well, thank you all
We
for.
do need a closed session.
Yes, we do.
Briefly.
Yes, we do. I have
Do
to.
you have a motion?
I do.
Madam Chair,
Natalie?
I move that we go into closed session to consider confidential personnel information protected under GS 143-318-11A1, A3, and A6, and 115C-319, and to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve attorney-client privilege as provided in GS 143-318.11A3.
I second that.
Oh, I was like, okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please know by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. Hearing none, we are
Yeah.
going into closed session.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being